Zetherian Prime Academy was the most famous school in the galaxy. Students came from more than 100 alien worlds to study there. The academy floated in space, built on a giant ring station with a view of stars on all sides. It was a place where the best and brightest were trained to become leaders, scientists, and explorers. Among the students was Virella, a proud girl from the Cathari race. The Cathari were tall, graceful, and known for their intelligence. Virella came from a powerful family and believed her people were above others. She looked down on anyone who wasn't from a high civilization. One day, during the first cycle of the new term, a human boy entered their class. His name was Jace Rowan, and he was from Earth. Virella's smooth blue eyebrows raised when she saw him. "A human," she whispered to her friend. "What is he doing here? This isn't a farming school." Her friend giggled, but Jace didn't seem to hear them. He was quiet and calm. He wore a simple gray uniform like the rest, but he looked different. Shorter, leaner, with brown skin and sharp eyes that watched everything carefully. Their teacher, a tall robotic AI named Instructor L9, introduced him. "This is Cadet Jace Rowan. He is from Earth, Sector 12. Please welcome him." Most students gave polite nods. A few were curious. Earth was not well known. Many thought it was a small planet with a violent past and little importance. Virella wasn't curious. She was annoyed. "We are training for interstellar missions. What can a human teach us? How to make fire from rocks?" Later that day, during lunch at the dining hall, Jace sat alone. He didn't seem sad or lonely. He simply ate his food quietly and watched the sky through the glass dome above. Virella walked past his table and couldn't resist saying something. "Do you miss your cows, human?" she said with a smirk. "Or maybe your dirt huts?" Jace looked up at her. He didn't smile, and he didn't frown. His voice was calm. "I miss the stars from my world. They looked different. But these are nice too." His answer surprised her. She expected anger or sarcasm. Instead, he sounded peaceful. She said nothing more and walked away. That week, the students were given a team assignment. They had to work in pairs to complete a low-gravity navigation test in the simulator. To her horror, Virella was paired with Jace. "This must be a mistake," she told Instructor L9. "There are no mistakes," the instructor replied. "Work together." Virella sighed but agreed. She told herself she would carry the task alone. Inside the simulator, the gravity was low, and the floor was made of spinning platforms and floating objects. The goal was to move through the field and reach the end without touching any red zones. Virella went first. She jumped high, flipped through the air, and used her long limbs to land on the floating pads. She moved quickly but missed a sensor, and triggered a red zone. Bzzzt! A sound warned them of the mistake. She looked back. "Don't mess it up more than this," she told Jace. Jace didn't respond. He studied the field slowly, then moved with careful steps. Instead of jumping far, he used small, precise movements. He didn't rush. He balanced on each surface and watched the rotating objects. To her surprise, he made it through the entire course without triggering a single red zone. "Simulation complete," the system said. Jace Rowan, 97%. Virella Cathari, 81%. Virella couldn't hide her disdain. She knew this exercise would be easy for her. Her people were natural engineers, and she was trained in the best schools of her race. But Jace, he was from Earth, a planet where technology had barely advanced beyond the steam engines. The simulation started. The team was assigned to repair a communication tower on a simulated colony. The task seemed straightforward, but as they worked, it became clear that things weren't going as smoothly as Virella had expected. Virella immediately took charge, her Cathari instincts kicking in. She scanned the systems, her long fingers moving swiftly across the control panels, pulling up schematics and data. "This part is simple," she said confidently. "I'll handle the wiring." Jace stepped forward, observing. "I think we should check the power grid first," he said, his voice calm and steady. "If it's off, it might affect the tower's systems," Varela scoffed. "You think you know better than me? I've studied this for years." But Jace didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to the power grid and began to examine it. Varela rolled her eyes and continued with the wiring, but she couldn't help glancing at Jace. He wasn't hurried or uncertain. He moved slowly, taking in every detail. After a few minutes, Jace called her over. "The grid's completely down. It's no good trying to fix the tower first." She frowned, annoyed that he was right, but she didn't admit it. Instead, she turned back to the wires and continued working. The tension in the air was palpable. Varela didn't like being told what to do, especially by someone she considered inferior. But Jace was calm, and he seemed to have a methodical way of thinking that she didn't expect from a human. As the task went on, Jace quietly worked with Varela, offering suggestions here and there. Each time he spoke, it was with careful consideration, always looking at the big picture. Varela, however, grew more and more frustrated. She didn't want to admit that this human was better at certain things. She was Cathari, brilliant, efficient, and precise. She didn't need help from anyone, especially not from a human. After hours of hard work, the team finally restored the power grid and got the communication tower running. The simulation ended, and Instructor L9 evaluated their performance. Team Alpha has completed the task with an 82% efficiency rate, the instructor said, projecting the results on a screen. "Well done." Varela's face was tight with frustration. She had expected their team to finish in record time, but they hadn't. It wasn't perfect, and she couldn't ignore that Jace had been a key part of the success. "You were right about the grid," she admitted, though she didn't like the words coming out of her mouth. Jace nodded, his expression still calm. "Sometimes it's not about who's right or wrong. It's about finding the best solution." Varela didn't say anything. The more time she spent around Jace, the more she realized that his approach was different from hers. While she was focused on speed and precision, he was more patient, more strategic. It was frustrating. She had always been the best in her class, and now this human was challenging that. Over the next few days, Varela watched Jace more closely. He didn't show off his skills, didn't try to impress anyone. He simply did his work quietly, helping others when needed, but never seeking praise. His ability to stay calm and think logically during stressful situations stood in sharp contrast to the impulsive nature of most of the students, including Varela. One evening, as they sat in the academy's common room, Varela found herself alone with Jace. Most of the other students were socializing, but she had no interest in joining them. Instead, she sat down at a table across from him. "You're different from the others," she said bluntly, trying to understand him. Jace looked up, his brown eyes meeting hers. "How so?" "You don't show off," Varela said. "You don't. Try to compete with anyone." Jace smiled slightly. "I'm not here to compete. I'm here to learn." Varela's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Learn? What's there to learn from us? We have technology, power, knowledge." Jace shook his head. "You have all that, but you also have a lot to learn about patience, about working together, and about understanding the bigger picture." For the first time, Varela found herself questioning her beliefs. Was there something to what Jace was saying? She had always thought her race was the greatest, but maybe humans had something she didn't understand yet. The weeks at Zetherian Prime Academy passed by quickly, and Varela began to feel a strange mix of frustration and curiosity whenever she was around Jace Rowan. She couldn't deny it anymore. He was different. His calm nature, his quiet confidence, and his ability to think in ways she hadn't considered before were starting to get under her skin. For the first time in her life, she was unsure about her place in the academy. Despite all the tension between them, Jace never seemed to care. He continued to study, work, and interact with his classmates in a way that kept him in the background. But Virella wasn't content with that. She couldn't stand the idea that this human, who had been laughed at and mocked by many students, was slowly but surely proving himself to be more capable than most of them. One day, instructor L9 announced an inter-team challenge designed to test the students' skills in both tactical and leadership abilities. The challenge was called the Leadership Duel, a one-on-one competition where two students would face off to complete a series of difficult tasks, each requiring both strategy and physical skills. Virella's eyes immediately focused on Jace. She wasn't going to let him stay out of the spotlight any longer. The Cathari had always prided themselves on being the best, and she wasn't about to let a human show up her people again. "I want to challenge Jace," she declared, her voice clear and sharp. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Sue, her. A few students exchanged looks, surprised by her sudden boldness. Everyone knew that Virella was one of the top students, and her skill in competitions was unmatched. But Jace was a human. Instructor L9 raised one mechanical eyebrow. "Are you certain, Cadet Virella? The challenge will be tough." Virella stood tall, her purple skin glowing slightly in the light. "I am certain. I want to prove once and for all that humans are no match for us." Jace, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, looked up. His expression was calm, but there was a glint of interest in his eyes. "I accept your challenge," he said simply, his voice steady. The next day, the students gathered in the Academy's massive training arena. The arena was designed to simulate different environments from across the galaxy, and today it was set up to resemble an alien jungle. The thick trees, moving vines, and artificial weather would make it an ideal place for the competition. Virella was confident. She had been trained in every environment imaginable, and she had studied the techniques used by the greatest leaders of the galaxy. The challenge was set. They would each navigate through the jungle, complete several obstacles, and retrieve a hidden artifact from the center of the arena. The first to complete the task would win. The horn sounded, and both students began. Virella sprinted ahead, her long legs giving her a natural advantage in the thick terrain. She moved with grace, dodging obstacles and using her keen senses to navigate the environment. Her eyes scanned the area, reading the patterns in the movement of the trees and the shifting shadows on the ground. Behind her, Jace followed more slowly. He didn't rush like Virella. Instead, he carefully stepped over roots, paused to listen to the sounds of the jungle, and observed his surroundings. It was clear that he wasn't in a hurry to beat her. Instead, he was studying the environment, just like he had done in every other task they'd worked on together. Virella reached the first obstacle, a deep ravine with slippery rocks. Without hesitation, she jumped, her Cathari agility making it easy for her to clear the gap. She landed on the other side, hardly breaking a sweat. But when she turned around to check on Jace, she saw something unexpected. He wasn't following the same path. Instead of rushing, Jace had crouched by the edge of the ravine. He had found a natural bridge made of vines and branches, which would allow him to cross without using brute force. It was a clever solution, one that showed patience and resourcefulness. Virella felt a flicker of doubt in her mind. She had expected him to take the obvious route, just like most humans would have. But Jace was thinking differently, and that worried her. The challenge continued. Virella pushed herself harder, but every time she looked back, Jace was there, calmly following. His own path, not getting distracted or flustered. His progress was steady, and as they neared the final section of the course, Virella found herself losing ground. At the final obstacle, both students reached the same point at nearly the same time, a dense forest of shifting vines that seemed to trap anything caught inside. To get to the artifact in the center, they had to cut through the vines and find the path. Virella wasted no time. She immediately pulled out her knife, slicing through the vines with quick, sharp movements. Her strength and skill were evident as she hacked her way through the thick plant life. But when she looked up, Jace was doing something different. He wasn't cutting the vines at all. Instead, he was studying the way they moved, the way they responded to his presence. Slowly and carefully he moved his hands through the vines, coaxing them to part naturally without violence. Virella couldn't believe it. She had always been taught to overpower obstacles, to fight through them. But Jace was working with the environment, not against it. In the end, Jace reached the artifact first. He wasn't the fastest, but he was the most resourceful. He had taken his time, thought about the problem from every angle, and used his skills to the fullest. As the instructors announced his victory, Virella stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had been defeated, but it wasn't just about the challenge. It was about the way Jace had approached the entire situation. He hadn't fought her. He hadn't even tried to prove he was better. Instead, he had simply solved the problem, in his own way, without the need for arrogance or force. For the first time in her life, Virella realized something she had never considered before. Maybe the true strength wasn't in being the fastest or the strongest. Maybe it was in understanding, patience, and the ability to think differently. After her defeat in the leadership duel, Virella found herself in a strange position. She had always been confident, always sure of her abilities. Yet now she was faced with a reality she couldn't ignore. Jace Rowan, the human from Earth, had beaten her in a competition that she thought would be easy. Worse, he hadn't done it with strength or speed, but with patience and resourcefulness. Those weren't qualities Virella was used to seeing in anyone, especially not a human. She couldn't stop thinking about their last challenge. Every time she tried to push the thought aside, it crept back in. There was something about Jace that intrigued her, something that went beyond his calm demeanor and quiet confidence. She wanted to understand him, to figure out how he had managed to succeed where she had failed. So, she did something she had never done before. She began to study Earth's history. She spent her free time in the Academy's library digging through ancient records and archives. She found a section labeled Terran History and Culture, which seemed like the perfect place to start. The records were full of stories of ancient Earth, stories that were often overlooked by the Academy's more advanced races. Earth was considered a backwater planet in the galactic community, with its technology and history regarded as primitive. But Virella didn't see it that way anymore. The more she read, the more she realized that there was far more to humans than she had ever imagined. The first thing that struck her was the resilience of Earth's people. The archives were full of tales about how humans had survived countless wars, natural disasters, and near-extinction events. From the rise of their great civilizations to the fall of many powerful empires, Earth's history was filled with stories of struggle, perseverance, and the will to keep going, no matter the odds. One story stood out to her: the Terran Resolve Protocol. It was a secretive program, mentioned only in passing in the records. From what Virella could gather, it was a military initiative designed to help humans survive the most extreme conditions, both in space and on their home planet. The protocol included strategies for surviving hostile environments, handling resources when they were scarce, and leading people through difficult times. Interesting, she muttered to herself. They're not as weak as I thought. But what truly fascinated Virella were the stories of the Terran explorers, humans who had traveled across their world and eventually to the stars. These explorers were not the strongest or the smartest. In fact, many of them came from humble beginnings. They were farmers, laborers, and ordinary people who had been chosen for their resilience, problem-solving skills, and ability to adapt to any situation. It seemed that humans didn't rely on brute force or advanced technology the way other races did. Instead, they used their minds and their ability to work together. Virella's mind raced as she thought about what she had read. She had always believed that strength was the key to survival, that power was the most important thing in the galaxy. But now, she wasn't so sure. Could it be that humans, with their quiet strength and adaptability, had something the other races didn't? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Jace was the perfect example of everything she had been reading. He didn't use force to win, didn't brag about his abilities. He simply worked with the situation at hand, solving problems without fanfare or aggression. He was a true Terran explorer, adaptable, thoughtful, and patient. One evening, as Virella sat in the library reading about Earth's great historical figures, Instructor L9 passed by her table. "Cadet Virella," the instructor said, its mechanical voice soft yet firm. "I see you're studying Terran history. Is there something you wish to discuss?" Virella looked up, slightly startled. "Oh, yes, I've been reading about humans. I never realized how much they've been through." Instructor L9 tilted its head slightly. "The Terran people have a unique history. They were once considered weak and backward, but they have proven their resilience time and time again. There is much to learn from them." Virella nodded. "I never thought of it that way. I always thought humans were just primitive. But now, I'm not so sure." "You've learned something important," said Instructor L9. "Strength does not always lie in size or power. Sometimes, true strength comes from the ability to adapt, to survive against all odds." Virella paused, processing the instructor's words. She had always been so focused on the idea of being the best, of being the strongest, that she never considered the value of adaptability and resilience. Perhaps it wasn't just physical strength that made a person strong. Perhaps it was something more. After the instructor left, Virella returned to her research, more determined than ever to understand the humans. She spent hours reading more stories of their battles, their wars, their struggles to survive in an often hostile galaxy. But there was one question that lingered in her mind. What made Jace so different from the others? Virella needed answers. She needed to understand what drove him, what made him tick. She had to know what made him so calm, so steady, when everything around him seemed to fall apart. The next day, she found herself seeking him out in the common room. Jace was sitting at one of the tables eating his lunch in silence. Virella hesitated for a moment, then walked over to him. "Jace," she began, her voice a little hesitant. "I've been reading about humans, about your history." Jace looked up, his brown eyes meeting hers. "Oh?" "Yes," she said, sitting down across from him. "I've been reading about your past, how humans have survived so many challenges, how you adapt to everything. I think I understand why you think the way you do now. But I still don't understand why you act the way you do. You never get angry, never seem frustrated. Why?" Jace smiled slightly, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "It's not about being calm or never getting frustrated. It's about knowing that frustration doesn't help anything. When you face something hard, you don't waste time getting angry. You just find a way to work through it." Virella blinked, processing his words. "You're right," she said slowly. "I never thought of it that way." After her conversation with Jace, Virella couldn't shake the feeling that she had only scratched the surface of something much deeper. He had a way of seeing the world that was different from hers, a way that seemed far more practical and effective. She had always relied on her training, her speed, and her intellect to succeed. But Jace relied on something else. It wasn't strength, and it wasn't speed. It was his ability to understand the world around him and adapt to whatever came his way. It was a strange thought, but it kept her awake at night. Why was he so calm? Why was he so different from the other humans she had read about? Humans were supposed to be chaotic, emotional, and impulsive. Yet Jace seemed completely controlled, completely at peace with whatever challenge came his way. Virella couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to him than just being a human. That evening, as she sat in the Academy's common room, she found herself staring at Jace from across the room. He was sitting by himself again, quietly reading a datapad. As always, his expression was calm, focused and unbothered by the noise around him. Virella couldn't stop herself. She walked over to him, determination in her step. "Jace," she began, her voice firm, "I've been looking into Earth's history. I know you didn't grow up here in the Academy, but what about your past? What makes you different from the others?" Jace looked up at her, his brown eyes steady. "My past?" he asked, as if he wasn't sure why she was asking. "Yes," Virella said, sitting down beside him. "I've been studying Earth, and I know that humans are supposed to be, well, primitive, but you're not like that. You're different. What happened to you?" Jace took a deep breath, his expression thoughtful. For a moment he was silent, as if he was deciding how much he should share. Finally, he spoke. "I wasn't always like this," he said quietly. "Back on Earth, I was part of a special program. I didn't grow up like most people. My parents weren't wealthy, and I didn't come from a family of scientists or politicians. But when I was young, I was selected for a special project, something called the Terran Resolve Protocol. It was a program designed to train humans to survive in the harshest environments, to think strategically, and to lead in difficult situations." Virella's eyes widened in surprise. "You? A part of that program?" she asked, incredulous. Jace nodded. "Yes. It wasn't about strength or intelligence. It was about adaptability. The program was about teaching us to overcome obstacles, to stay calm in the face of danger, and to lead when others couldn't. We were taught to rely on our instincts, to think on our feet, and to always stay calm under pressure. It wasn't easy. We went through some pretty extreme training, but it helped me become who I am today." Virella sat back, processing what he had just said. She had never heard of the Terran Resolve Protocol before, but it made sense. Jace's calmness, his ability to think clearly no matter what the situation, wasn't just natural talent. It was the result of years of training, of being taught how to handle any situation without panic. "So, you were trained to be like this?" Virella asked, her voice a little softer now. "Not exactly like this," Jace replied with a small smile. "I was trained to be resourceful, to lead others, and to survive. But the rest of it, how I think, how I act, comes from the people I met along the way. The lessons I learned weren't just about survival. They were about understanding people and situations. I learned that the best way to handle a crisis isn't always to charge forward or fight. Sometimes it's about taking a step back, thinking about the bigger picture, and finding a solution that works for everyone." Virella couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always believed that strength was the answer to everything, that being fast, strong, and smart was the key to success. But Jace's story was challenging everything she had ever known. She thought back to the last competition, the one where Jace had beaten her. She had been so focused on getting to the finish line first, on proving her superiority, that she hadn't stopped to think about the bigger picture. She had charged through obstacles without considering the consequences, while Jace had been calm, patient, and thoughtful. He had taken his time and made sure each decision he made was the best one, not just for himself, but for the team. "Jace," Virella said after a long pause, "I've always been told that the strongest survive, but now I'm starting to think, maybe I've been wrong all this time." Jace looked at her, his eyes soft with understanding. "It's not about being the strongest or the smartest, Virella. It's about being the one who can adapt. Strength is important, but it's only one part of the equation. Being able to learn, to adjust, and to stay calm, that's what makes you truly strong." Virella sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on his words. She had always been so sure of her place in the Academy, so confident in her own abilities. But now, she was beginning to see that there was more to strength than she had ever realized. Maybe the true power wasn't in physical strength or speed, but in the ability to understand, adapt, and lead in the face of uncertainty. "What now?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Jace smiled, his calm expression never changing. "Now, we continue to learn, we continue to adapt, and we work together. There's a lot I still need to learn, just like you, but if we help each other, we'll both grow stronger." Virella nodded, a new sense of respect in her eyes. For the first time, she understood what Jace was really about. He wasn't just a human who had managed to beat her in a challenge. He was someone who had faced adversity, who had been trained to handle difficult situations, and who had learned how to lead not with force but with understanding. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to Earth and its people than she had ever realized. The days at Zetherian Prime Academy were usually calm, with the students focusing on their studies and training. But one morning, everything changed. The Academy's automated defense system, usually flawless, suddenly malfunctioned. The warning sirens went off, echoing through the vast corridors of the floating space station. The peaceful routine of the students was shattered by a loud, urgent voice over the intercom. "Attention, all students and staff. Unidentified ships have breached the outer perimeter. All personnel are to report to their assigned emergency stations immediately." Virella's heart raced as she stood up from the table in the common room. A mix of panic and confusion filled the air as students scrambled to follow the orders. Virella, however, remained calm. This was no time for panic. She knew that if the Academy was under attack, it would require more than just strength to survive. It would take strategy, teamwork, and leadership, qualities that Jace Rowan had shown time and time again. Without hesitation, she moved quickly through the halls, following the flow of students heading toward the emergency shelters. But as she passed one of the observation windows, her eyes caught sight of something that made her stop in her tracks. Through the glass, she could see the dark, threatening shapes of pirate ships closing in on the Academy. They were small, fast ships, designed for raiding and terrorizing. Their weapons glowed with an eerie light, and they were moving closer, preparing to board. Virella's mind raced. The Academy's security system had always been reliable. How had the pirates managed to break through? In the chaos, she spotted Jace moving steadily in the opposite direction, towards a group of students who had gathered near a control center. "Jace!" Virella called out, running toward him. "What are you doing? We need to go to the shelter." Jace turned to her with that familiar calmness in his eyes. "There's no time for hiding," he said. "The pirates are already inside the station. We need to take action." Virella's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, take action? We're just students." "We're not just students," Jace replied, his voice firm. "We've been trained. We've learned how to survive and think on our feet. We can help." Virella hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should follow him. But the confidence in Ihiu, his voice was hard to ignore. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and start doing something. "You're right," she said, taking a deep breath. "What do you need from me?" "We need to restore the Academy's communication systems," Jace said. "Without them, we can't call for backup, and the other students won't know how to respond. If we can fix the main control hub, we can the pirates from taking over." Virella nodded. "I'm with you. Let's go." Together, they made their way to the control center, where several other students were already working frantically to try and stop the pirates from reaching the inner areas of the Academy. The students, however, were inexperienced in dealing with such an attack, and their panic only made things worse. Jace and Virella quickly took charge. "Listen up," Jace called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to reset the central control system. It's the only way we can regain control of the station. Everyone needs to stay calm and work together." Virella immediately began assisting with the technical systems, her Cathari training kicking in as she assessed the situation. She worked quickly, accessing the main data streams and directing the other students to fix the broken connections. Jace, meanwhile, kept an eye on the big picture, making sure that everyone was staying focused and doing their part. It was difficult work, and time was running out. The pirates were already inside the station, and they had begun to infiltrate the upper levels. Varela could hear the sound of their heavy boots echoing through the halls, getting closer. "We're running out of time," one of the students shouted, panic in his voice. Jace glanced at Varela, his expression calm despite the growing danger. "We need to finish this now. Varela, I need you to manually override the security locks on the lower levels. We can't. Let the pirates get to the core systems." Varela nodded, her heart pounding. She sprinted to the lower-level controls, fighting against the rising sense of dread in her chest. As she worked, she felt the temperature in the room drop, a sign that the pirates had activated their own systems to shut down the Academy's defenses. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Varela and Jace managed to restore the communication systems. The lights flickered back to life and the station's defense shields began to activate again. But it wasn't enough. "We're still not safe," Jace said, his voice steady. "The pirates are inside and they won't stop until they have control of the station." Varela felt a rush of fear, but Jace's calmness steadied her. She couldn't let fear control her now. "Jace," she said, her voice firm, "what do we do next?" "We fight back," he said simply. "We use the station systems to outsmart them. We can't match them in strength, but we can outthink them." Varela took a deep breath. The old version of herself, proud, quick, to act and ready to fight, wanted to rush forward, to use force to win. But the new version of herself, the one who had learned from Jace, knew that wasn't the way. Together, they devised a plan. They used the Academy's automated systems to trap the pirates in certain sections of the station, leading them into carefully planned ambushes. Every move was calculated, every step taken with precision. The pirates, unaware of the Academy's ability to turn the tide, were trapped. One by one, they were caught, isolated, and captured. When the final pirate was secured, the Academy's security systems had regained full control, and the threat was over. Exhausted but triumphant, Varela turned to Jace. "We did it," she said, a sense of awe in her voice. Jace nodded, his expression calm as ever. "We did it together. That's how we survive." Varela smiled, realizing something important. It wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It wasn't about overpowering your enemies. It was about staying calm, thinking strategically, and working together. And in that moment, Varela understood. Jace's true strength wasn't in his physical abilities or his knowledge. It was in his ability to adapt, to lead, and to think when everyone else was panicking. That was what made him different. That was what made him strong. The day after the pirate attack, the Academy was quieter than usual. The students had completed their assignments, and now they were processing everything that had happened. The once calm corridors now felt empty, the hum of the station's systems the only sound that filled the air. The attack had left the Academy shaken, but it had also united them in a way nothing else could. Varela sat in the common room, her mind still processing the events of the past. 24 hours. She had seen the pirates up close, heard the fear in her classmates' voices, and felt the weight of their reliance on her leadership. But it was Jace who had kept everyone grounded, who had shown them all the importance of thinking clearly under pressure. She had seen his strength, but not in the way she had expected. Jace had never raised his voice, never once let his calm slip, no matter how dire the situation got. He didn't need to show off or prove anything. He simply acted, and in doing so, he had led them to victory. "Varela," Jace's voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up and saw him walking toward her, his face as calm as ever. There was no sign of the tension from the attack, no exhaustion in his movements. He was simply, "Jace." "Hey," Varela said, offering him a small smile. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. I know I said I'd never follow a human, but I think I was wrong." Jace's eyes softened and he took a seat beside her. "It wasn't about being human or alien, Varela. It was about understanding the situation and responding to it. That's all." Varela nodded slowly. "You were right about everything. I've spent my whole life thinking that power and speed were the answers to everything. But you showed me that sometimes it's not about being the strongest or fastest. It's about thinking, adapting, and leading when things get tough." Jace smiled, but there was a humbleness to it. "That's the real strength, I think. It's not about showing off or proving how great you are. It's about being there for others, thinking ahead and knowing when to step up." Virella turned her gaze to the window, watching the stars outside the academy. She felt something new inside her, a sense of understanding, of respect not just for Jace, but for everything he represented. The way he had led, the way he had acted, without needing to prove anything, had changed her. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about being the loudest, the strongest, or the most powerful. It was about knowing your strengths and weaknesses, using your mind, and always keeping the bigger picture in sight. "Jace," she said, her voice softer now, "I've been thinking a lot about Earth, about your people. They're not what I thought they were. I always saw humans as weak, stuck in the past, but now, I think they've been through so much and they still survived. I don't think I ever gave them enough credit." Jace's expression grew thoughtful. "Humans have had to survive a lot, and we've made mistakes, just like every other race, but we've learned from them, and we keep going. That's what makes us who we are. It's not about perfection. It's about resilience." Virella took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "You've shown me what resilience really means. It's not just about pushing through physical challenges. It's about facing everything that comes your way with a steady heart and a clear mind. You've taught me that." The two of them sat in silence for a while, just watching the stars drift by outside. The academy, once a place that felt like a battlefield of competition and pride, now seemed more like a home, a place where they could all learn, grow, and respect one another for who they truly were. Virella felt a change inside herself. She had always been the one to lead, the one to shine. But now she understood that leadership wasn't just about being in charge, it was about being part of something bigger, something more important than individual glory. "I'm glad you're here, Jace," Virella said finally, her voice sincere. "I think the Academy is lucky to have you, and I'm lucky to have you as a friend." Jace's smile was warm. "I'm glad to be here too, and I'm glad we can be friends. We've both got a lot to learn, but we'll get there." Virella nodded, feeling more certain than ever that the future was full of possibilities. The lessons she had learned from Jace were ones she would carry with her, not just at the academy, but beyond it. There was so much more to life than being the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes the most important thing was to be calm, to think clearly, and to adapt to whatever came your way. As the days passed, the academy returned to its normal rhythm, but Virella knew she would never be the same. She would never look at strength the way she once had. She had learned that true strength came from the ability to grow, to change, and to face challenges with a steady heart. And now, more than ever, she knew that the future wasn't about winning at all costs. It was about learning, growing, and building something meaningful together, and she couldn't wait to see where that journey would take her.